By the time we were 5 years old, we were already totally infatuated with animals.
No one knows anything about most of them, so that's the attraction.
My friends thought I was weird. I didn't have too many friends back then.
Looks like the hole goes that way.
Yeah.
I hope in my lifetime I can make a small contribution to the island, to the world, to the people.
It's a female, fast.
Yeah.
Extremely fast. And aggressive. See how it's reacting?
Yeah.
That's a good one. See him?
Yeah.
Look at the fang. See that fang? Oh, here he comes. Here he comes. In the laboratory, they'll crawl on you real easy. But in nature like this, grab him. Don't let him get on my back. Don't let him get on my neck. Get him off. Knock him off. Where is he?
He's here.
Oh, it's okay. Leave him there then. He's not on my neck yet?
No, it's right there.
Yeah, never let him get up on your neck. For some reason, it always bothers you a little bit when that happens.
He's starting to go. So what should I do? Just like...
Well, the only time he'll bite, they won't bite until they raise their head up. Careful, I don't get bit.
This little Guana Island, I gonna say it from the bottom of my heart. Guana Island did something which was very smart. Oh, well, now I ain't want to make no fuss, but they are studying all nature around.
This is Watercrane Guide on Guana Island, an 850-acre luxury resort in the Caribbean, some 1,700 miles southeast of Florida, where, for 2 months a year, hundreds of scientists have congregated for the past 20 years to study Guana's thousands of plants and animals and to restore those that used to live there but were killed off.
You all keep the good work,
We've tried to capture on film why we're doing some of that. A lot of reasons. In the early days, it was a scientist called Skip Lazelle who taught at Harvard and at Yale.
The way I got here in the first place was...
Dr. James Lazelle is head of the Conservation Agency. In this capacity, he's conducted field research in more than 20 countries around the world.
I came to these islands in 1957 when I was 17 years old, right out of high school, and I was a zoo collector. I was down here to catch iguanas to put in zoos. The idea that animals were rare only meant that nobody knew where to find them. We assumed everything was common once you found its proper habitat. Well, that changed very quickly over the next decade or so when we began to realize that agriculture and deforestation and human overpopulation had really decimated animal populations, and some of these things were really legitimately on the edge of extinction. Some of them were actually extinct.
In 1980, Skip was commissioned by the government of the British Virgin Islands to travel the BVI and look for potential wildlife sanctuaries. It was during this search that he came upon Guana Island and developed a plan that ultimately became the Guana Island Project.
One of the things that makes this area unique and wonderful, you've got a large number of islands that a mere 10,000 years ago were all united as one single landmass when the sea level was much lower during the glacial maximum. As sea level rose, of course, the islands became islands. What were hills previously on sort of a large plain became islands. And so you have very high species diversity here because the animals that are here could get here over land.
We asked if he could look around and do what he's been doing in the years since, which is making a telephone book of the various species that are here, just saying what's here and where it is. That's, of course, one of the important things that scientists do, just so that we get to understand our world, but it's really just the basic skeleton of what they then do in studying species.
This group of islands is called Nature's Little Secret, and that applies to the marine life, the nice pristine beaches and reefs, the restored woodlands and the few surviving natural woodlands, and the rare species that you can see nowhere else in the world. One such rare species is the bridled quail dove, which, though endangered throughout the world, is common here on Guana Island.
Based on Guana's unique species diversity, Dr. Lazelle proposed to Henry Jarecki that Guana would prove an ideal setting for long-term biological field research.
I don't know if I would have had anything like the success with the previous owner. The previous owner might not have had the same sort of curiosity or the same sort of resources to back up the curiosity. And that's what makes this island especially attractive to us biologists to study. We're just really beginning to chronicle the diversity of life on Earth. I mean, literally, we've described and named about 2 million species, and we think there's probably somewhere between 10 and 30 million species.
And so as his scientists came down here from all over the world, from China, from Israel and parts of Europe, from Canada, naturally from all over the United States, not only did they internationalize the local scene by bringing people from Tortola over and getting to know them, but they did more and more studies on the various species that were here.
I am going to say, it's glad to see so many scientists here today. Well, I hope they don't put me in no jug. They only walk the islands looking for the bug. Well, now they...
One of the people who was always here to welcome the scientists is Foxy Callwood, a naturalist and folk singer from the neighboring island of Jost van Dyke.
If they want to find a real beetle, they got to go to England. I said, man, haven't you heard? In England, beetles...
Almost all of the many scientists who come have their own special reason for being here. Razi, for example, is an Israeli biologist. His interest in helping his country eke out a life from the desert leads him to study how lizards that develop on dry islands evolve differently from those on wetter islands. Razi measures how much water Guana lizards lose every day and compares that with the water loss of lizards he brings to Guana from drier neighboring islands.
By this experiment, we hope we can decide if the water loss is a genetic trait of these populations, or is it only a trait which can change according to the changing environment.
Isn't that amazing? You wouldn't believe it. 2 PhD herpetologists would have so much trouble finding a lizard that size in a bag that small.
Yeah. I think that what we are seeing now, a process of creating new species. You can see it in natural laboratory, you can call it. You have the same species at different islands, let's say 8, 9 islands. Each island is separated from the other by, let's say, 5,000, 10,000 years. Now, if you didn't take the lizard from one island to the other, each island has its own population. If the weather conditions are different from island to island, and we know it is, we expect that in maybe 200 years, 300, 500 years, you will find that all the populations that you see in the islands will be separated from each other just by adaptation.
That's a female of the most common species of lizard on the island, called a crested anole. The female doesn't have a crest, she has a stripe down her back. Here's a terrible looking fellow, a very scruffy male right there. You see, looks like he's got mold all over him. That's actually his shed skin. He's in the process of shedding his skin. He'll actually rub that off and chew it off and peel it off. And lizards, like snakes, shed their skins as they grow.
Guana's lizards also are a vital part in the study of DNA, the genetic material of life. By comparing the DNA of Guana's lizard population with that of lizards on neighboring islands, scientists can determine how long the populations have been separated and how different traits have evolved. Gad also is from Israel, but his interests are not in the lizard's water metabolism or genetic differences, but in their social life.
These guys have 2 ways of sending messages to one another. One is this up and down thing, the push-ups. Another is for males, under the throat you can see a dark stain. It's a dewlap, it's a flap of skin. And when they get really excited, it goes up and down, this huge flap of skin. So they do this in 2 different kinds of contexts. One is to tell other males, this is my territory, stay away, don't bug me. And the other is to tell females, hey, I'm sexy, come make love to me.
Push up. take no chance. Here on Guana Island, he's doing that roll-up dance. Push up, push down, I say push up, push down, one more time, push up, push down, I say now, push up, and push down.
Okay, so you told us all about what this lizard eats and how it's different from one side to another and one season to another and what it means ecologically. Why should we care? What is the importance to humanity?
For many scientists, the reason for pursuing their craft is to make life better for others. Insights from lizard physiology have, for example, helped cardiac surgeons fashion new operating techniques. Jim Connery, one of the field assistants who came to work with Skip, was himself the beneficiary of such a heart operation.
I had enhanced myocardial revascularization, which is a laser technique which blows holes in your left ventricle and allows the oxygenated blood to come out of the left ventricle and into the tissue. It's based on a reptile model of the heart. And very possibly any one of these scientists here could have been doing a little bit of research, the little grain of knowledge that led in later years to this particular procedure being available to coronary patients.
But making life better for others is not the only reason scientists do what they do.
We've tried to figure out over the years what is it that makes the scientists interested in what they do.
I have a filter here.
Many of them just like to make sense out of nature's inherent disorder. Wenhua Liu, who is Skip Lizelle's wife, is an entomologist who has shown that 4 different kinds of beetles found on Guana were in fact all variants of a single species.
You just swallowed the beetle? Aspirated the beetle?
He is too small, so he goes through there.
They're somewhat different than folks in business. They're different than folks in pure academics. So what makes them different?
I think I was born an animal hunter. My parents say that, that when I was 4 years old, nearsighted as a bat, I was crawling around on the ground catching ants and things like that because that's what I could see. I could focus on things that I was within a foot of.
I kept spending a lot of my waking hours when I was a kid running around chasing snakes.
What did your friends say?
My friends thought I was weird. I didn't have too many friends back then.
I think the first thing I was interested in was worms when my brother threw worms down my back, I think lots of kids are like that. You might get 2 kids walking across a garden. There'll be a slug on the ground. One kid will step on it, but the other kid will just look at it because they're interested to see what it is. I was the kid who picked up the slug to look at it.
We were thinking, I want to catch that. I want to find out where that bird goes. I want to see what that thing eats. We were just little kids who were curious about nature, as so many little kids are, and in our cases, it didn't go away. We were able to turn it into a profession.
I grew up camping. The natural history was always there, and you had your hand lens and you looked at everything and you identified everything because my parents always asked the question, what plant is that? What animal is that? So I grew up with it.
I love animals. Can I end there?
His family had traveled a lot when he was growing up, and we never did. Never crossed the Mississippi River, never been south of, I guess, New York City. So,
yeah, and then a year after we got married, we went to Africa.
Went to Africa, so I said, oh boy, I better hook up with this guy. He knows how to get places.
What I'm doing is banding this bird so it's individually marked. So I know it was on Guana Island on October 18th. Then if somebody picks it up somewhere else, we'll have some idea what this specific bird is doing. The band has an individual number which is not repeated anywhere. There will be some sort of message on there which will tell the finder where to send the band. I mean, it's amazing, these bands that come in from distant places.
26.4. That's a very small bird.
I've probably been banding for 25 years, 30 years maybe.
Woo!
Christina Ovaska's love of science comes from the thrill of finding a new species or a previously unidentified mating practice.
There's hundreds of species of these frogs, and no one knows anything about most of them. So that's the attraction.
When we first came to Guana,
How long ago was that?
This is our third year. Skip had, we knew there were frogs here. Skip knew there were frogs here, but he'd only ever heard the males. I think there maybe were 2 individuals had been caught, no females, nothing was known. It was an entire male population, and so we set about to prove, obviously, it isn't an entirely male population.
Better than that, we've observed the courtship behavior. And one of the things that we're looking at is what is called the advertisement calls, the calls that males make at night to attract females.
The regular calls for females is quite different for the 3 species. One species says, bo beep, bo beep. And then the one on Guana says, treep, treep, treep. And sometimes they do a chuck.
An example.
Can you do the call?
Can you make the, yeah, that's hard to...
We think that this is the aggressive call. And the 3rd species is very hard to do because it's a high whistle in the insect space of the spectrum. Skip, you help me.
Oh yes, man, I'm not wrong. You will find a frog singing love song. Oh yes, that's true as the stars is above. The noise is the frogs madly in love. They're singing, bo beep, bo beep. I say bo beep, bo beep, bo beep, bo beep. I say they're crying out, bo beep.
A rainy afternoon lets the scientists discuss how they became interested in biology.
So many of the basic elements of natural science are ones that the human race is typically frightened of: snakes and spiders and bugs.
What I see is the people who don't like animals are people who don't have experiences with them and don't know very much and are afraid because it's something new. A spider is something they've never touched before, or a spider is something that people have always said, don't touch it. Instead of feeding the curiosity of a child.
You think curiosity is a good explanation for it?
For me it is. My curiosity is wanting to know what plant something is or why some animal is doing something. Or
so it's a special.
Maybe I'm not that interested in people.
It's a different type of information.
But that's an interesting comment, that you're not that interested in people. Scientists we both know who really have almost no use for people. They wish the people would go away. Guana Island would be a better place if all the people would go away and we would leave it to the animals.
What I'd really like to do with the rest of my career is decrease the human population. I do everything I can to do that, short of having to go to jail. Climate change results from the greenhouse effect caused by the buildup of CO2 in the atmosphere, which is caused by the sheer number of human beings. As the human population explodes, human beings displace other animals and plants. Man has waged war on plants. Man has cut down whole forests. They literally exterminate species without even knowing they're there.
If man's insensitivity to nature has anything to do with his fear of animals, it can perhaps be relieved by educating the planet's younger generation. Jim Ortiz is a spider specialist whose fascination with the fear people feel in the presence of spiders has led him to learn all he can and teach young people about them. Ian Greenspan, who has come to Guana from New York, is a willing student.
Notice that these little sacks right here made out of web, they use those to hide into like a cave, and they actually run up inside of that cave. Then they have what they call a trap line that goes out to the orb web. See the orb web? And they hide in here, and when their prey hits the orb web, they feel the trap line shake, they run out, grab the animal, and pull it back up into this little tunnel right here. If you open this up, you'll see a spider come out. See where
There.
he's hiding in there?
Yeah.
Normally when you grab a tarantula like this, it gets pretty upset. Now, what we're going to do is reach in here between the front legs and have him open his fangs up. You can actually see the fangs come up at this point. They're fairly large, about 1/4 of an inch long. See them coming up?
Wow.
Now that little fang right there can penetrate you just like a hypodermic syringe. In fact, a little drop of poison now is coming out of the end of it. See that little drop of poison?
Oh, yeah.
You know, let's go find some of the really nasty tarantulas.
Okay.
The ones that really attack. They're over here. I don't know where they are. Even in the universities, you won't find many people working with spiders because usually they'll want them to work with commercial entomology, pesticides, something that affects man more. When I talked to the old guy that showed me how to do
Jim shows Ian how to use a thin piece of grass to coax the spider out of its hole in the ground.
It's real quiet because they pick up vibrations in the ground. You put it down the hole, you twist it just like this. Now, if there's a tarantula down there, you start pulling it out, you'll feel pressure on the end of the line. You'll actually grab it like a fish. There, he grabbed it. You gotta feel it. You wanna feel it? Sure. Put your hand, grab your hand, he's pulling it in. Hold on.
Whoa, he's grabbing on.
Okay, stop if he lets go.
Yeah, he's
keep
on.
pulling, keep pulling. Can you see him coming up?
Yeah.
Here he comes. Here he comes, here he comes. You can see his legs now. Look at the fang. See that fang that was,
Oh, damn.
see the fang that was stuck
Yeah.
in there? That fang was huge. That fang was just wrapped around that thing. It was a huge, that's a good sized spider for a hole that size. Okay, let's see how far that hole goes down. Yeah. Now look in here, you'll see it. See the legs come out probably. There's the hole. Now never stick your hand in there.
Yeah.
You know what he did to that piece of wood? Your finger would be the same thing.
Yeah.
You'd think it's a piece of meat.
Well, it actually is a piece of meat, but...
Scientists and kids like the kind of recognition they get from finding a new species or finding something new about an animal that nobody's ever known before, nobody's ever written down before.
It's like hunting for big game in Africa. This is just absolutely one of the most fun things in the world to do.
That kind of experience of self-actualization, I think, has a lot to do with what makes scientists care about their work.
There he is.
Whoa. That's a big one.
Now this is the female. The males are usually much bigger. It feels real funny when they run up your arm. And notice he's not even attempting to bite at all. She is just really, really docile. Don't move.
Not moving.
But you can see these animals are really quite benign. They're one of the most beneficial animals we have on the island. They kill cockroaches, they kill the grasshoppers, the crickets, and yet people have this unbelievable fear of them. They're great. Notice how close he gets to it now. The plastic between him and the spider. You did a great job, Ian. Now, why are kids like you when I'm teaching?
For students from neighboring islands, a visit to Guana can plant the seed to a possible career.
I think that for those of us who become professional biologists, we simply never grow up. We keep that childlike fascination.
Skip brings young people and gets them to crash through the brush with him and jump after lizards and climb trees. Kids like that, hands-onness.
This is a fiddler crab. It's a male because of its big claw. The females just have 2 small claws.
My niece Liana, who teaches biology now at the community college in Tortola, first got interested in biology through Skip Lazelle and the work that he did.
Most people need to get a really good look at birds and then look them up in the bird book. It's Birds of Puerto Rico and the Virgin Islands. Daryl has like this sixth sense about birds. He can see like a bird 10 miles away flying by and tell me what it is.
Every bird has a different, this characteristic. So it's not too hard. Tell you that those were spotted sandpipers, by the way they flap their wings. It's like flap, 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 flap.
We're trying now to bring that to young people, both in Tortola but also in the States. That kind of exploration, when I think finding new species and finding out how species live, marking species and coming back to find out how they've multiplied or how they've moved about or how they've made it. Finding out things like that is exciting.
Because of tourism, where a lot of things were happening to the natural environment, where a lot of the environment was being destroyed, I always knew that I wanted to do something that would benefit the islands, my island.
It's all going downhill, terms of conservation and all of that, and you know, something needs to be done.
Everywhere we look with these environmental questions, it always comes down to a people problem. Even if you talk about what seems to be a natural change, it's probably a natural change that is a human-caused natural change. Everywhere you look, it is a people problem.
I agree 100%, but you need to take it one step further and realize that the solution has also got to be a people solution.
Dick Drayton, a senior scientist for the National Parks Trust, reflects on how to merge the needs of the environment and the needs of people.
It involves politics, it involves economics, it involves social and cultural norms. Part of the local custom is to have animals run wild, either on the island on which you live or on some of the deserted islands. And whenever there's a festival of some sort, Christmas or a wedding or something like that, you just go over with a bunch of fellas and you shoot a couple of the goats or whatever, and you've got your meat for your celebration. So you can't just come and say, right, we're ridding this island of all the wild animals, because you're cutting deeply into a cultural norm that must be given due consideration. Maybe it's an issue of re-educating people.
One way the Guana Project shares its ecological concerns and findings with the community is to hold an annual symposium at the local college.
I think one of the most important things that we can do is to share these birds with everybody, because the more you know about a subject, the more you're going to care about it.
One, I'd like to talk a little bit about the fear of spiders and how this affects tourism into an area, and how it can actually be a positive factor and not a negative factor.
The general public here can see then that the science can be translated into ecotourism.
And there's a great interest in the British Virgin Islands in conservation. They have discovered that a lot of tourists care about nature.
Equally important, the scientists learn from the local naturalists and fishermen. Liana Jarecki, who started as a young field assistant working with Skip Lozelle when she was 12, has herself become a marine biologist.
It's really nice to meet some of the older local people because they have such a knowledge and feeling for the way the ecology of the islands work, especially the marine ecology. Like he was saying, well, the moon has just gone down and the tides are changing and now the fish won't bite. And it's just that kind of intuitive knowledge that the older people here have.
How many you catch? 35?
It's funny because they'll say the same things that we as scientists spend years to figure out, and yet it's passed down through generations of knowledge and they know it. It's interesting because even though the showy animals, things with backbones, I mean, I loved snakes and lizards when I was a kid. Now I'm sort of more interested in things like sponges. In the ponds I study, I'm just fascinated by these tiny creatures that swim around, or even the bacteria that form the scum layer on the bottom. It's fascinating to me that things most people think are just insignificant or even gross have such an incredible biological importance to the rest of life. The fascination of life as a whole and everything about it being so important is a prime motivation.
Put on your snorkel and come with me. In the water we might see a breeding frenzy.
Little fish were being chased by big fish and the birds going berserk.
Let's go down and watch the corals and the fish. Now I ain't going to tell you no lie. Now the big one pushes the chasing the fry. Well, that is the way it just goes. The board and the fish, all of them know.
Betty Ann Schreiber is a specialist on seabirds who has come to Guana many times to study their long-term development.
Pelicans take a while to learn how to feed, so these youngsters are less successful at catching fish. You can tell when a pelican has caught a fish, but once they dive, they don't immediately bob back up. The head stays down in the water because they've got a pouch full of water, which holds 5 gallons, and they can't lift that out of the water. So they slowly draw their head back up, draining the water out of the sides of the bill, and then you'll see them toss their head as they swallow what they've caught. There are very few research stations like Guana Island where we can go and know that that island is not going to be developed and your population's gone and some condominium put up. So the opportunity to do long-term research in a place like this is really fantastic. That pouch is the same as the pelican's pouch, but frigate birds don't use it to catch fish in. The males use it to court.
There's a brown booby, and around the gape, this yellow stuff right here, I'm not going to reach in there. On a male, that's blue, so this is a female.
I think my heart is beating faster than the bird's.
Can you feel it, can't you?
She won't become traumatized at all for me holding her like this?
No.
If you don't have an example like this to look at, with things living well, you have no idea over the years, as something deteriorates, that you're losing them.
Now, if you feel in here, Betty Ann, you can explain this.
Their lungs actually ramify on this little air sac system throughout the breast. It's like bubble pack. It's part of the lung system, but it also cushions them when they dive. Brown boobies nest on the ground, and the problem with nesting on the ground, which a lot of these birds do, is that you are very susceptible to predators. Anything that walks through an area or eats these birds destroys the colonies. So they're in real trouble in a lot of places because of that.
There she goes.
You know, this is the sort of thing I'd like to see more kids get involved with. Get out here and to see the eggs, see the chicks, take the measurements, and start to feel a sense of ownership. These are our birds. We need to protect these birds.
I think the human population has tampered with nature by extirpating a lot of the species. And the idea of restoring what existed here once helps people see what they're doing.
We've tried through the scientists to bring a lot of species back to Guana and to the British Virgin Islands that used to be here.
What we're really interested in doing is restoring natural ecosystems. That is, try to bring things back to a condition that they were in before human beings wiped the species out. If you just wanted to make a zoo, if you just wanted to import anything that might live here, then you could start to import exotic species. So, you know, people have suggested that we import monkeys or peacocks or even giraffes and zebras, things like that. That's not what I'm interested in as a conservation biologist. I'm not interested in making a zoo in the Caribbean. I'm interested in trying to restore this island to close to its original condition. But species restoration is not without its controversies. One of the immediate questions that arises is whether or not you're really bringing back a native that used to be in a particular place, or whether you're introducing an exotic that never was naturally there. And our four species are the Virgin Island rock iguana, the Caribbean flamingo, the red-legged tortoise, and most recently the white-crowned pigeon, are all very interesting cases in point. The flamingos, for example, we know were originally present in the British Virgin Islands. We have excellent historic records of thousands of them nesting on Anegada. About 1980, I conceived the idea that, yes, we should attempt restorations, and the flamingo was probably the most immediate and important thing to try, because those huge salt ponds really don't function without flamingos. I mean, flamingos are an integral part of the ecology of big salt ponds like that, because they are filter feeders, and they eat the larvae of insects like midges that live in the salt ponds. They eat the larvae of fiddler crabs. They eat the coryxid beetles, which are nifty little aquatic beetles. They're just a major predator on the salt pond ecology. So we used the Guana Island salt pond as a test site to see if the birds would do all right back in the BVI, or if people would kill them the way they'd been killed in the first place. We didn't think so, and we were right. Fortunately, nobody has killed any.
We've brought iguanas from islands where they might have been in danger and brought them here to Guana, where we leave it as a nature preserve, as a wildlife sanctuary, and the 6 or 8 iguanas that we brought here some 8 or 10 years ago probably have multiplied to 100 or more, so that if there are areas in the British Virgin Islands that now want iguanas, it's possible for them to be repopulated. That seemed like a fitting project for an island like ours that's named after a rock formation that looks like an iguana head.
There was a prediction that the iguanas would not prosper and do well here on Guana Island. The natural habitat of iguanas is only limestone country, that they never occurred on these volcanic islands. Now, I think that's clearly wrong. We have subfossil remains, bones and whatnot, that indicate that they did.
Numi Mitchell is an iguana behavior specialist who has given much thought to why there were no iguanas left on the island when Skip first came here.
Hunters, cats, and dogs wiped them out everywhere that they previously occurred, except for Anegada, which is an island behind us. And Anegada is different from all of the other islands in this area of the Virgin Islands by being limestone. And by being limestone, it's very porous, full of cracked rocks with great escape burrows for the iguanas to dart down. So when hunters came, when dogs came, when cats came, they could easily tackle a little one, like we're looking at here. They can just beat it down some hole on Anegada, whereas here, there's very little, if you look at the soil, there's very little natural cavities. And so what we're seeing here that's unusual is the babies in a tree. And I've seen only 2 iguanas in a tree before. Both instances were here on Guana. What this area was a Garden of Eden for iguanas. But the iguanas here were doing really well and we could tame them. And that's what we decided to do in order to get closer and study the diet here. Come on, girlie.
Working with iguanas is not always that easy.
Come on, girl. Hey, little one. Hey, little one. How are you? Oh, cool. She looks really good. Oh.
She likes that.
Can I give her one? Come here, Chica. Come on, girl. Come on, girl.
Watch your finger, you know.
Yeah.
She go for everything.
Yeah, she will. She does. Oops, sorry, girlie.
Oh, see?
Wait,
This is what I mean.
Wait. Now be gentle. Ow! Oh, shit. Crazy. You fine? Yeah,
Oh, yeah.
sure. No.
Like the spider, the iguana can't tell the difference between food and a finger.
What they have is pretty
Oh,
sharp,
so
fine teeth in parallel rows, and they're actually shaped like fleur-de-lis. She's just enthusiastic.
She doesn't really
She doesn't
meant to
mean any harm.
attack you, you know. One time in New Year, I almost take her up off the ground.
Really?
Yeah, I put my hand in the air like.
People sometimes ask me, well, what's the point of saving an ugly old wrinkled, green-brown, dragon-like, intolerant creature? And I simply answer, because it's unique. I would no more feel that I had the right to destroy a population of a species or a species in entirety than I would feel it was my right to destroy a picture by one of the masters.
Yes, the iguana is back. I want you to thank the scientists for that. On Guana Island, the iguanas is back, and I want you to thank the scientists for that.
The original restoration thing was a quid pro quo. We were going to get flamingos for Anegada, and Anegada was going to give us iguanas, right? And now both islands have both. See, so now instead of no flamingos, now both islands have flamingos. There were iguanas only there. Now there are iguanas here and there. See, so already we've made the world more diverse. We have more populations of things than we used to. One of our major objectives is to restore to this group of islands all of the species that formerly occurred here that we believe could still live here now. And most of those species, that category, would be things that were killed by humans for food.
After the flamingos and iguanas, we set out to restore the red-legged tortoise. This is a 10-year-old tortoise. He was first caught last year on the 2nd of October.
By recording the movements and characteristics of individual tortoises, Numi and Skip can monitor the survival and growth of the restored populations.
You can see he grew. These are his younger scales. These are the scutes for when he was a younger tortoise. And then as he gets, and you can see there's a broad band on his first or third year or something like that. And then they get a little bit thinner, and by the time he's out here, it sort of mashes
But
into...
he's putting on a few millimeters in every one of these bands, so that's amounting to a couple of centimeters in a year.
So he looks like he sheds a few times a year. He's a male.
He's a male.
And we know he's a male because of this concave plastron.
And his huge tail.
When he has his intromittent organ inside there.
The tortoise restoration is just one of the species restorations that we've attempted. Of course, the flamingos are famous, and they are reproducing well, so we're very pleased and happy with that. But the tortoises, we started with 6 individuals, 3 males and 3 females, and nobody knew for years. There were reports occasionally of people seeing little baby tortoises, and every once in a while somebody would see a large tortoise. But we really had no idea what was happening until this year when we began putting radio transmitters on them.
Now we take him right back to the exact locality where he was caught, which has been flagged. You know, we've got flagging tape on the locality, and put him right down exactly where he came from and let him go on about his business.
Last chance to check the tag. Oh yeah, without the antenna.
So I think we can safely conclude that he isn't terribly bothered by the radio transmitter, and that his short time in captivity hasn't particularly traumatized him, especially since he ate us out of house and home. So I think that's a happy tortoise.
Guana's latest restoration effort consisted of bringing the white-crowned pigeon back from Puerto Rico, where they survived even after being wiped out in the BVI some 50 or more years ago.
Liao Weiping is the Chinese ornithologist who first came here in '84, and what he has done here on Guana Island is reforestation. Although his primary interest in life is birds.
You see, my baby come home, you see? My baby just come home from hospital, right? The baby.
So they doves or pigeons?
It's the white-claw pigeon.
How many are in there, Leon?
5 of them.
5?
5.
That's great.
How old are they?
They are about 10 to 12 days old.
What's the next steps with them?
They are going to be in a cage for a year.
They'll be in a cage for a year?
Yeah.
Birds and bats on these islands are critically important dispersal mechanisms for seeds because they eat fruit. That includes white-crowned pigeons. They eat fruit, they fly around, they defecate seeds. What we think will happen as we restore a natural ecosystem is that that forest will get more diverse. We'd already flunked out of the pigeon game once. We messed up. We didn't succeed.
How does that happen?
Well, the baby pigeons died. Well, they didn't die this time. I came tugging on Carlos's sleeve because the director of the wildlife part of the Puerto Rican Department of Natural Resources said, Carlos Ruiz is the man who knows about pigeons.
And also he spent a lot of his energy trying to get it warm because it have no feathers.
Now, you will be feeding these birds 2 or 3 times a day.
Yes.
So I think until the birds really can fly and take care of themselves, you have to be mother pigeon.
Of course, I love the bird just like my baby. Okay, I will do anything as I can. I can take care of them.
Okay, so
Just leave any place, not that problem for me.
Because the critical thing is wherever they learn to fly is going to be their home.
You have to learn to eat yourself. You have to eat quickly and grow up quickly. 爱到夜空星星亮，故人心里轻轻唱，情歌声声系故乡，又辜负老农心酸，又辜负老农心酸。
Oh, it makes me cry.
That's my song.
Guana is a sanctuary and a refuge for a lot more than just the stout iguana and the red-legged tortoise and the crested anole and the tumbling flower beetles. It's really a refuge for the scientists, too. We come down here and we can pursue our projects in what is very close to a natural environment. But we don't lose track of the fact that the little projects that we're doing, if we're studying water loss in lizards, well, that ties directly into global climate change. If we're studying the species of little tumbling flower beetles or spiders, that ties directly to biodiversity. So I think that's the perspective that I like to have on Guana Island, is that we can come down here for a month a year and study things that are like pure science. Whatever it was that she was doing, she's back to doing it. We're on the front lines of environmental activism, trying to change the world for the better, and the things we're working on do fit into that larger picture, and I think that's what makes the place so exciting and meaningful to those of us who come here every year.
So much fun. This little Guana Island, I gonna see it from the bottom of my heart. Guana Island did something which was very smart. Oh, well, now I ain't want to make no fuss, but they are studying all nature around us. I said no, I ain't no slob. For years, Guana Island have been doing a damn good job. Well, when I say so, it is very true. Guana Island even putting education in a college too. I telling you, I gonna let you know. I just heard about the good things you're doing on the radio. I could even continue with my song, but I want you all keep the good work, so. Nothing. Believe me, it's with plenty care. Scientists from all over the world come to visit here. And on this island, they really do walk. And with animals, they even try to talk. Well, it's really notice. They come and help with the endangered species. Well, what are they really? What are doing it for? They are helping out the iguanas and more. Well, it's very true. Even the scientists, they are a species too.